In October of 1891, a survey topographer named Charles Ray sat down at a camp table in western New Mexico, in the shadow of a sandstone mesa whose name he had been asked not to write down, and began the fourth day's entry in his field book. He had kept field books for 11 years, through the Colorado canyons and the Montana boundary work, and his books were famous in the profession for being complete. Weather, barometric readings, bearings, sketches, the day's work in full sentences. He wrote the date. He wrote the temperature at sunrise. He began his third sentence, the entry reads, in his even hand. At first light we returned to the stair and found that and there the field book of Charles Ray ends, not the page, the book. Every leaf after that sentence is blank. The expedition Ray served was a small one, a private survey outfitted in the East, working under letters of introduction from a museum-backed research enterprise, in the same corridor of New Mexico where the Hemingway expedition had recently collapsed in scandal and confusion. Its purpose, according to the outfitting correspondence that survives, was to examine reported antiquities in the Mesa country southeast of Zuni Pueblo. The party numbered 6. They hired 2 Zuni men as guides at the Pueblo, and it is from the descendants of one of those guides, not from any government file, that we know what the Zuni told the surveyors before they rode out. They told them the mesa the Easterners had chosen was not empty, not haunted, not forbidden. The distinction was recorded by the trader who interpreted in a letter he wrote years later. The Zuni word the elder used, the trader said, was the ordinary word one uses for a house that has people in it. The mesa was spoken of the way you speak of an occupied dwelling. The elder advised the party to survey any other mesa in the district. He said the one they wanted had been closed a long time and was not empty, and both Zuni guides, men who had climbed all their lives, declined calmly, finally to go up. The surveyors went up anyway. For 3 days, Ray's field book records what they found on the way. A stair, cut into the cliff, a doorway, high on the face, sealed with fitted masonry. And on the morning of the 4th day, a sentence that stops after the word the. The question is not what the 6 men saw at first light on the 17th of October 1891. The question is why every institution that touched the expedition's records over the next 30 years ended up holding a file with the same shape as Ray's book, complete, orderly, and ending early. To understand what the Zuni elders' warning meant, you have to understand what the Zuni had already survived, and what they had already seen carried away. Zuni Pueblo, in 1891, sat at the center of the most intense decade of anthropological attention any community in North America has ever endured. Frank Hamilton Cushing, a real man, and one of the strangest figures in the history of American science, had lived at Zuni from 1879 to 1884 as a Smithsonian ethnologist, been initiated into the priesthood of the bow, and published the Pueblo's inner life to the world. The Hemingway expedition, which Cushing then led, had dug through the Salt River ruins of Arizona and collected on a massive scale before collapsing amid illness, infighting, and accusations that its records were chaos. Much of what Hemingway collected and recorded would sit unpublished and effectively lost to scholarship for nearly a century. That is not speculation. It is the documented fate of the expedition's archive. The Zuni of 1891 did not need to be told what happened to things that Eastern institutions took an interest in. They had watched it happen for 12 years. So when the elder at Zuni told a private survey party that one particular mesa was not empty, he was not performing mystery for visitors. The Zuni had, and have, a precise geography of the sacred Dawa Yalan, the great mesa above the Pueblo, where the people survived the Spanish reprisals of 1680, is only its most visible landmark. Places in that geography have statuses, and the statuses have consequences. Some places are visited on pilgrimage, some are entered only by particular societies, and some, a very few, in the accounts ethnographers were ever permitted to record, are closed. The trader's letter is explicit on this point, and it is the hinge of the whole case. The elder did not say the mesa was sacred, a word the trader knew well and would have used. He said it was closed, and that it was not empty, and he used the word for a dwelling with people in it. Anthropology has a filing drawer for such statements. Mythological present, the description of ancient things in the grammar of the ongoing. The drawer assumes the speaker is being poetic. The two Zuni guides did not behave like men being poetic. They rode with the party to the base of the Mesa. The warning, note, was about going up, not about the country around it. They hunted for the camp, hauled water, named landmarks. And each morning, when the 6 white men started for the talus, the guides stayed with the horses, and no wage the expedition's paymaster offered his account ledger survives, and the escalating figures in it are their own quiet testimony, changed either man's mind on any of the 3 days. Men decline haunted places with ceremony, with unease. The ledger records no unease. The guide's refusal, as the paymaster noted it, was the refusal of men declining to walk into someone else's house. Ray's field book, for the 3 days it runs, is the document of a professional being slowly overtaken by what he is measuring. Day 1 is survey routine, triangulation from the flats, the mesa's height computed at just over 400 feet, notes on the talus approach. The first anomaly enters as a bearing. Stair visible in cliff face, NNW quadrant, approx 80 feet of rise, cut work. Cut work a stair carved into the rock itself, not the pecked hand and toe trails the party had seen at other mesas, but, as Ray describes it on day 2 after climbing to its foot, steps dressed square, treads 14 in. Risers even, edges true, the whole flight crowned, meaning the treads were cut with a slight camber to shed water. Engineering. On day 2, he also records the detail that has drawn the attention of everyone who has ever read the surviving typescript. The stair's lower 20 feet had been removed. Not eroded removed, the rock cut back flush, so that the flight begins in air, reachable only by ladder. Someone had amputated the access. Ray, a man of bearings and elevations, permits himself a single sentence of interpretation. The work of cutting away is younger than the work of the stair. The stair was built by one people. It was closed by someone later, or by the same people on their way out. Day 3 is the doorway. High on the face, at the head of the amputated stair, the party's field glasses resolved what Ray sketches in the book's last drawing, an opening roughly 4 feet by 6, closed with coursed masonry, fitted, no mortar visible, set back in a reveal cut for the purpose. A door, in other words, built shut, not rubble jammed in a hole, but a ceiling executed with the same crowned and dressed care as the stair itself. Around the reveal, Ray notes, smoke darkening above, old, and at its foot, on a ledge, small vessels, whole, in a row. Whole pots, in a row, on a ledge, before a sealed door. Offerings, of some age but in a row, upright, unbroken, in a land of wind. The Zuni guides, told of them that evening, were not surprised. The trader's letter records the elders' phrasing at the Pueblo weeks later, when the party passed back through, reduced and silent. Of course there were vessels. The door is fed. The expedition photographer exposed 3 glass plates that 3rd afternoon, the stair, the face, the doorway under magnification. Ray logs the exposures plates 41, 42, 43 in the book's final full paragraph. They are the last recorded acts of the expedition's 3rd day. Then, at first light, we returned to the stair and found that the then 400 miles of blank paper. A retired BLM archaeologist named Miriam Kessler, who spent 30 years in the Four Corners and reviewed the surviving typescript for a state historical journal, put the professional consensus about that sentence in one line. Field men stop writing for one of 2 reasons: nothing more to record, or no more recording permitted. A book that stops mid-sentence is the second kind. What happened to the expedition after October 17th survives only in edges and echoes, but the edges are documentary, and they all bend the same direction. The party had outfitted for 6 weeks. The return freight receipt at the Gallup railhead is dated 23 days early. The expedition's leader, a man with publication plans lodged in his outfitting correspondence, took a teaching position that winter and never published a paragraph about New Mexico for the rest of his life. The photographer's plate case reached the east. Its arrival is logged in the sponsoring enterprise's shipping register, containing, per the register, 40 plates. Plates 41, 42 and 43 are not in the count. 3 exposures logged in the field never became 3 plates in the register, and no correspondence explains the arithmetic. And Ray kept surveying in Mexico and then in Canada, always thereafter for private mining clients. And when he died in 1928, his field books, the complete row of an 11-year career, went to a nephew in Ohio, all of them close with the season's work signed off in his hand, except one. Set that cluster of facts beside the institutional history of the region, and the shape becomes familiar. The Hemingway Archive, the largest body of southwestern field records of its era, sat effectively sealed and unpublished for generations, a documented scholarly scandal. Cushing, the one man alive with the standing and the Zuni fluency to have pursued the 1891 report, was dead by 1900 at 42. In the same decades, the canyon country of the Southwest was being federalized parcel by parcel parks, monuments, reservations of every legal flavor, and access to the back country of antiquities passed permanently behind permit systems. The Antiquities Act of 1906, a real and in most ways admirable law, had one universally acknowledged effect. After it, no private party would ever again legally climb an unexcavated ruin and write down what they found. The 1891 expedition was among the last of its kind, and its record ends mid-sentence. Nobody had connected the Mesa to the wider pattern, because the Mesa was never named. Ray honored the request to his last page. The trader's letter calls it only the closed one. S.E. of the Pueblo. Researchers who have tried to identify it from the surviving bearings have narrowed it to a cluster of candidates in the checkerboard country, where Zuni, BLM, and private sections interleave, and have found that the strongest candidate sits today within a parcel withdrawn from entry, fenced, and signed against trespass under authorities that the county plat does not specify. I am not claiming the withdrawal is connected to 1891. I do not have the evidence for that. Land gets withdrawn in that country for a dozen dull reasons. What I have is a recurring shape, the same one every time, a warning from the people who know, a record that ends early, evidence subtracted in transit 3 plates, 12 days of letters, the summers of a lighthouse log, and, a generation later, a fence. Western archaeology calls the elders' statement mythology. The Zuni call it the reason 2 working men would not go up for any wage in the ledger. Every institution that touched this case returned the same shape, a file that ends early. The sponsoring enterprise's register logs 40 plates and no explanation. The leader's university holds his papers, teaching notes, Mexican mining reports, and nothing of New Mexico. A researcher who queried the National Anthropological Archives for any 1891 correspondence concerning surveys southeast of Zuni received the reply that is, by now, the refrain of this channel. No records responsive to the request. Nothing was seized. Nothing needed to be. The leader chose silence. The enterprise filed the shortfall without a query. The archive indexed what arrived and not what didn't. The museum files it without display. The register balances itself. Within a generation, the expedition existed only in fragments nobody connects. The fragments that survive, say it with me, because they never entered an institution. The trader's letter stayed in his family's store papers in Gallup for 80 years before a granddaughter lent it for copying. The paymaster's ledger survived in a trunk in Missouri. The typescript of Ray's field book exists because the nephew in Ohio, sometime in the 1930s, typed his uncle's last book out, all of it, including the final sentence, including a typed note of his own at the bottom that reads, "Book ends thus. Uncle Charles would never speak on it." When pressed, he said only that they had been correctly told. They had been correctly told. And in the guide's family at Zuni, the account came down 4 generations, as such accounts do not for outsiders, mostly, but a descendant speaking at a public lands hearing in the 1990s, arguing for access protections in the checkerboard country, said one sentence into the record that anyone can read in the hearing transcript. "Our people told the surveyors in my great-grandfather's time that the place was lived in, and they went up, and after that they agreed with us. After that they agreed with us." 6 men climbed toward a sealed door that the people of that country said was fed. 3 days were written, 3 plates were exposed. And every man connected with the 4th morning spent the rest of his life declining to describe it, which is, if you think about it, the one behavior common to hoaxers, to the traumatized, and to men who have given their word. Objects that enter institutions vanish. Words kept in families survive. The door is still sealed right now. That is the reasonable inference, at least, because no unsealing was ever recorded, and in that country the record of an excavation is louder than the excavation itself permits. Monographs, museum accessions. There are none. Somewhere southeast of Zuni Pueblo, high on a cliff face in the checkerboard country, behind coursed masonry fitted into a cut, reveal whatever the elder meant by not empty is still not empty, and the amputated stair still begins in air, 80 feet below. You can test the edges of this story yourself. Cushing's Zuni years are real and published. The Hemingway expedition's collapse and the near-century burial of its records is documented scholarly history. Dawa Yalan stands above the Pueblo on any map. The Antiquities Act and the closing of the backcountry is statute and record. And the Zuni nation's position on its closed places has not moved an inch in 130 years, which you may weigh however you like, but institutions change their stories, and the Zuni have not changed theirs. The vessels on the ledge were whole, upright, in a row, in a land of wind. Someone tends them. That is what a row of unbroken pots before a sealed door means, in any century, on any continent. The elder said the door was fed. The guides refused a climbing wage. The book stops at the plates stop at 40. The leader taught freshmen for 30 years and died with New Mexico, absent from his papers, and a nephew in Ohio typed the truest sentence in this entire investigation at the bottom of a blank-tailed field book. They had been correctly told. Every other case this channel has followed ends with something buried under fill, under a pond, under a lake, under moss. This one ends with something maintained. Closed a long time, the elder said. Not abandoned. Closed. The distinction between a ruin and a house is not architecture. It is whether anyone still comes. Someone still comes. The Mesa does not need our belief. It has a stair with no bottom, a door that is fed, and the patience of stone, and it only needs us to stop pretending that the people who told the surveyors the truth in 1891 were speaking in symbols. They were speaking from knowledge. The surveyors went up, and after that they agreed. Subscribe if you want to see what else the record ends early about. The next investigation is already in production. I will see you there.